Hello, I'm Larry Johnson. This is Countercurrents, and I am pleased to introduce you today to somebody most of you have never heard of. But Lance Gatling is genuinely one of the smartest people I know. When I was asked to speak at the United Nations and was drafting my remarks, I asked him to take a look at them. And believe me, having worked at the CIA, I've been through a lot of editors. I've never had someone who is as skilled at editing and providing excellent insights, both proper phrasing, diplomatically speaking, just how to say the right thing. But apart from that, Lance has served in the U.S. Army. He's been involved with technology at the most senior levels and currently lives in Asia. But with that, Lance, tell folks a little bit about your past.
Hi, Larry. Thanks for having me tonight. I take it with those kind words. There's no check attached to this.
So. No, just effusive praise.
I won't get paid by the word or the hours.
No.
Let's make the best of it. Thanks for having me. I appreciate your effort to educate people on issues. I don't agree with everything you say, but you say it, you stand up, you support it, and you're willing to learn, and that's what I hope to do. So I'm always willing to talk about things which have changed considerably over my longer than I ever thought could be possible lifespan. I grew up in a small farming community in East Arkansas. I went to West Point, and only just literally 2 or 3 months ago did I find out that I was a diversity acquisition by the United States Military Academy. They must have had too many jocks and other folks, and they took me, which was clearly for primarily academic standing, was I took tests really well when I was a kid and ended up with various scholarships, 4 years to Harvard, Rice University, and I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I thought I'd do a stint in the Army, and I said, well, that Harvard thing is not going to help me in the Army, so I'll go to West Point. That's why I turned down that scholarship to end up at the United States Military Academy, where I took, of all things, Brazilian dialect Portuguese. At the time, we didn't have academic majors. Everybody graduated with a Bachelor of Science. So I have a Bachelor of Science degree from what is now termed the best 4-year engineering college in the United States. My less than supportive friends point out that it's the only 4-year engineering college of that level in the United States, so therefore it is the best. But I took weapons systems engineering, and later when I got into aerospace companies, they puzzled for a while until one wise old man said, think of it as an aerospace degree on a one-way trip. And you're not worried about passenger comfort. So that's essentially it. It's a tremendous introduction to technology, which always fascinates me. I got to work with some of the brightest people on the planet. After going to West Point, I spent about 15 years in the active Army, much of it in East Asia, Korea, and Japan, either getting ready to come to Asia or going back to Asia. I became a U.S. Army Foreign Area Officer, which in most militaries is an intelligence specialist, intelligence specialty that focuses on languages, cultures, history, how to analyze things. And I was being trained to go back to Washington, D.C. and become an analyst in the Defense Intelligence Agency and Northeast Asia being China, Taiwan, Korea, Japan. And my colleagues that took that route spent the rest of their careers there. Some expanded on to South Asia, South Pacific islands. And I chose to argue with the Army to keep me in Japan. I didn't want to be a commuter into the Pentagon, some gigantic.
Good choice.
I spent enough time in the Pentagon to realize I didn't want to live there.
Yeah.
I got cross crosswise with the Army when they kept saying, you have to go back. I said, I don't have to go back. You can leave me here and I can continue to work in Japan. There are plenty of jobs in the military. I was in the U.S. Embassy Tokyo at the time in the military military technology transfer and sales office. And they kept saying, no, you got to go back. You got to go back. We have slots for you and you need to fill them. So I interviewed with some agencies in Washington, D.C. and the U.S. State Department. The U.S. State Department came up with the best deal. I left the active Army, joined the U.S. State Department, where I promptly drove to Toronto, Canada, for my first assignment in the in the Foreign Service. Toronto was very, very nice place to be. Not exactly the center of world attention. And my briefing at the State Department of the trade issues was hogs and spuds, hogs and logs, suds and spuds, which was potatoes, beer, wood products, and foodstuffs, particularly pork. Were major trade issues between the United States and Canada. It's a good thing to be at peace with your neighbors. So I worked there for a while. Was recruited out by a superb defense company that no one knew anything about. It's Texas Instruments Defense Group, and I headed up their business development for Asia Pacific. 13 countries all the way to India, 15 agents, big operational budget, lots of sales. So Texas Instruments made single chip calculators, the world's first single chip PC, speak and spell, and laser guided bombs. It was one of the foremost GPS companies unknown to most people. That company was bought by Raytheon. I became vice president of Asia for Raytheon. They later bought a huge portion of Hughes Electronics for the ground stations for satellites. So Boeing bought that later, and I became vice president of Asia for Boeing Space, working on space, selling rocket rides, satellites. So I've literally marketed everything from pocket knives and sporting goods to deep space probe equipment and the rockets to get there. I was a consultant to companies like SpaceX when it first came to Japan. They didn't have anybody in-house that did that, so they hired me as a consultant. Got to take people through the factories at SpaceX, and since then I've worked for probably 24 second and third tier companies after I left Boeing, smaller companies that couldn't afford to keep someone in-house. I've worked with Ukrainians who built the world's best rockets, and we're trying to work that out with the United States. They couldn't get that done before the latest unnecessary war that's torn everything apart.
Yeah.
But I've had a lot of fun and technology and such, and since I've been working on this for so long, I've been in Japan for almost 40 years. I've been working on these issues for the majority of my adult life. I kind of assume that everybody knows it, and I realize when I do talk to people, they don't know it.
They don't know it. Yeah.
Very much Eurocentric, or a lot of people understand a bit about Latin America, but a lot of misunderstandings or gaps in their knowledge regarding Asia. So perhaps we could go over some of that today.
Yeah.
I'm almost completely retired from the aerospace and defense side. Good timing on my part. Japan just announced they're going to double their defense budget, going to probably become the second largest on the planet about the time that everybody needs me and I can see which companies tag my LinkedIn and how they're looking for certain expertise. But I'm primarily focused on a history project of the untold history of modern Japan, and I'll have a link to that at the end of the presentation. So how's that?
That's great, man. Well, you forgot to mention the one most one of the more interesting facets as well. Your family history. The name Gatling was attached to the Gatling gun. So that was what, a great uncle?
He was a relative. Richard Jordan Gatling was a relative of mine. In a southern way, I'm more directly related to his wife. But yes. this thing shows my connection is unstable, so
No, you're looking great. It's coming across fine.
So yes, Richard Jordan Gatling, who the majority of the family was down south in the Carolinas. He grew up on a plantation in Carolinas. He was an inventor. He invented the screw propeller. And instead of getting his self to Washington in the patent office, he stopped along the way and visited everybody he'd been in college with on their way to Washington. It took about 3 weeks to get there. And when he went into the patent office to patent the screw propeller, they said, "Hey, there's this guy Erickson who was just in here a couple of days ago and submitted that." So he was always against that. He was always upset about that. He tried to sell it to the Union Army, and it turned out that Abraham Lincoln owned stock in a competing machine gun company called the Union Repeating Gun. And Abraham Lincoln and some senior senators actually owned stock in his biggest single competitor's company. And he was quite upset about that, too. So he thought he was blocked. And anyway, he was an interesting guy. He built a factory next to Samuel Colt's revolver factory in Hartford, Connecticut. When he retired, he sold the business to Samuel Colt, and the Gatling gun stayed in the U.S. Army inventory for about 45 years. When Teddy Roosevelt went up San Juan Hill, he had a battery of 4 Gatling guns firing in support, and they destroyed the Spanish defense. When General Custer met his end at the Battle of the Little Bighorn, he had 2 Gatling guns that he left behind because he said they'd slow him down.
Yeah.
So I sold military ammunition all over Asia, and no one ever forgot that name.
Yeah. Well, it is. You also represent. You're the face, sort of, that most people don't associate. They have no experience with the military-industrial complex directly. You've been inside the beast, but the reason I wanted to have you on today, because of your experience in Asia, because I told you we'd call it, "Why is the United States losing its mojo in Asia? Did we ever actually have any mojo?" Presumption that we may have even had any understanding of what was going on in Asia. So where are we? Do we even know what we're doing now?
Well, that's an excellent question. I think that someone knows, someone has a plan, and I've been very impressed with the progress the United States has made with things like the Quad, the United States, Japan, the UK, and Australia working together to get things done, and India. So there are some bilateral relationships that have been pushed towards making nice. So the U.S. has close bilateral relationships with Japan and with South Korea, but the Japanese and the Koreans, until just recently, have not had good relationships. And through the good offices of a lot of people who work very hard and have been able to explain to both parties that it's very much in their advantage to work together, and some interesting moves by the CCP and the Chinese. They've managed to put everybody on edge to the point that where it was impossible in years past to get multilateral cooperation on defense in Asia. Now people are making moves, sending ships, coordinating operations in the South China Sea, all sorts of things. So it's a tremendously interesting time to be here. I spent much of my active duty military career talking to the Japanese about why it was a good thing that they would do such and take such a move to cooperate with the South Koreans, to cooperate with the Philippines, and was always rebuffed. There was not politically acceptable in Japan to reach beyond its relationship with the United States to talk to other powers. And now they're in regular discussions with NATO. They have liaison offices with NATO. They have exchanges with the Filipinos. They're talking to the Vietnamese to some degree. That's pretty quiet. They talk regularly with the South Vietnamese. They're going to be, they're South Koreans. It's made a tremendous difference. Hopefully they'll never get to use it. They'll never have to use it. But certainly, as Sun Tzu said, it's the job of the general to make sure that he is prepared for war so he does not have to go to war.
Well, you were, let's see, a junior at West Point when SEATO came to an end, right? 1975. Is this an attempt to rebirth SEATO? And for anybody watching says, what's SEATO?
No, SEATO was never a viable platform. It predated my time working in Asia professionally. SEATO was never a viable platform. It was a wrong organization. It really was an economic treaty organization, and even it had its problems because of the different levels of development of the countries. They were at that time they were very much still developing countries. They didn't have the boom that the electronics industry, the IT industry has given everybody in Asia. I mean, all kinds of people. And SEATO never really was viable. But there are other discussions going on. But people are doing it. I mean, they've sent ships out. And like I say, a lot of this is driven by the aggressive nature of what the Chinese have done in the South China Sea over these last several years. If you can imagine, when I first went to China, they had like 4.5 million men in uniform, and they didn't even have enough rifles for all of them. So the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, spent a lot of time pirating CDs, running karaoke bars, houses of ill repute, smuggling, liquor into the country, doing all sorts of things in order to make revenue. No one had rank, so they had to know that Comrade Gatling was a general and Comrade Larry was a colonel, even though we wore the identical uniforms. And then I got there when they started wearing nicer uniforms. I see a thumbs up from somebody or something. Thank you.
I don't know where did that come from? That's interesting. Oh, you froze up there. Hello. You're back. I don't know where that you froze up there for a second. That mystery thumbs up appeared, and then all go on.
Maybe it's okay now.
Okay.
We went from that, and I was a strategic operations planner for the U.S. Army Japan and for U.S. Forces Japan, and the intelligence folks worked for us. And we had the operations plans, and they had to do the supporting plans to the tactical and theater level supporting plans. And there really wasn't much to know about China as far as I could tell. I mean, from our foxhole, which was not directly involved in it. And I'm not even sure there was an operations plan for China. There wasn't really anything there, which is astonishing to think of now with the world's biggest Navy, 355 ships. And essentially from nowhere, they had almost no blue water Navy assets worthy of the name. I'm not sure they do now. I mean, they have a lot of boats. It remains to be seen how they hold up under military style operations, which can be incredibly debilitating to crews and ships. But they sure got a lot of them right now.
But they're only let's call it military adventure outside of China since the Korean War was there when they went to blows with the Vietnamese over Cambodia, and that, as I remember, didn't turn out too well for them.
Well, the Vietnamese were battle hardened. Think of the years we made sure that happened. So the Vietnamese up north. The Chinese rolled in. They had no battleground experience whatsoever. Well, they rolled into North Vietnam. The Vietnamese withdrew, suckered them into some fire sacks, and pounded the hell out of them. It was ugly, and they haven't forgotten that. It was very ugly. And the Vietnamese are kind of the losers in a Semitic folk war many years ago. I mean, they're just another brand of Chinese that got beat in their home and pushed further south. I mean, it goes all the way to Thailand, essentially. So you think of the landmass of China has had all these, people, 58 recognized minorities or something, and more than that, perhaps. But over the millennia, they've been pushed out and pushed and pushed. Just like other peoples of the world, they've been pushed out of where they originally were by a stronger power. And so the Vietnamese and the Chinese have some interesting, long, and not particularly attractive history between them. But they've been tough. When I first joined the aerospace and defense industry, the notion that I would be able to do what I did right before I left the big company, which was to actually go and brief these people on certain non-lethal systems that we had. And later, the company that I worked for actually was able to sell coastal surveillance radars and the information network that ties them all together to display the data at a very high level. And there was talk of lethal weaponry being sold to the Vietnamese. So I'm sure there's more than a few of the 50-something thousand Americans that died fighting Vietnam, turning in their graves over the notion. But this is how much the Chinese have set everybody on edge.
Yeah, it's. I noticed that was it last couple of weeks, Vietnam and the Philippines have signed a defense agreement. And yet at the same time, Vietnam is wanting to join BRICS, which is with China and Russia as the two biggest players in that organization. How do you reconcile those two things, or can you reconcile them?
Well, it is a sign of long peace. Right? Long peace, the energy and discipline of the people to do business, to work hard, to gain market share, to build something that their neighbors want, and some instances need very much. So it seems kind of odd at one level, but I'm not so sure that it is odd in the great scope of history. The frozen Cold War, I mean, literally the Cold War that we grew up in, with very little trade back and forth, and the COCOM controls and all of the technology transfer restrictions that were imposed upon the Soviet Union and all of its satellites behind the Iron Curtain, is not a regular thing. It's a very bizarre thing. Yet, in history, there's also no time where someone could say, I have a little bit of rare earth minerals here that I can process, and you, the United States, can't process because your liability lawyers and the EPA and everybody else doesn't like the fact that these things aren't very clean. So despite having plenty of this for the United States and the world, we could supply the world with rare earths. Components, the elements that are needed in advanced electronics. The Chinese said, well, we'll make this stuff. You can just buy it from us. Well, it turns out that the Chinese have said that for a whole range of things that anyone individually kind of scratch your head, but collectively you ask who in Washington was minding the store. I worked at a very big company that made some of the world's most advanced semiconductors, and I was present when we were offshoring that as quickly as possible. Now, why did we do that? And I ask, being relatively recently out of the military and the State Department, I forgot to talk about my time in the State Department. I ask, why are we offshoring such important strategic assets as these semiconductor plants? And the long version was, well, America has personal liability lawyers, and any pregnant woman who walks downwind of a semiconductor plant or works in the plant or draws water from the plant has a miscarriage, she joins a class action suit against all of the semiconductor companies. And of course there are exotic and some dangerous chemicals involved in processing semiconductor wafers and turning them into chips and building them up into usable units. And we're tired of fighting that. We're tired of the issues that evolve around that. All of our competitors are doing it. It's a lower overhead. The Taiwanese, fill in the blank, the Taiwanese government, the Malaysian government, Japanese government, whoever has said, don't worry about it. We'll take care of the effluent and the hazardous chemicals, and that's our problem. We'll take it. And people looked around and said, well, looks good to me. We'll keep the smarts in-house. We'll learn, we'll do the design and keep the secret sauce as to how the chips are made, but we'll put the manufacturing in some place where they don't have personal injury lawyers, where they're not being hammered on by the EPA, where the government supports them rather than tries to bankrupt them at every turn. And then we looked up and it was all gone. It was just gone, right? It was a pretty astonishing thing. And it wasn't just semiconductors. It goes all the way through. I was listening to Kash Patel speaking with someone on a podcast today, and he was talking about blackouts and electrical power circuits for the United States. And I actually did some studies on that started with an IT side. How would you protect your systems against bad actors taking control of your systems? And I took a group of Japanese to the United States and introduced them to a bunch of folks in the United States government who really want Japan to be strong and to have a well-guarded electrical grid system. And the first thing out of the first guy's first meeting, first thing out of his mouth was talking about digital Pearl Harbor, which was the name of this massive exercise.
Man.
and I didn't know it, right? I'd never heard of it before. It wasn't a classified name, but it was the name for the exercise. The results were classified. They did tell us quite a bit about the overall section of it. And the Japanese jaws dropped, their eyes open, they're listening. Did he say that right? Yeah. And in the name of the exercise in which malefactors got inside the U.S. Electrical grid and shut it down was called Digital Pearl Harbor. So we finished, we've spent a week in Washington seeing everybody under the sun that I could get these gentlemen in to see. And we got back to Japan, and I said, well, what did you think about all this? What was your reaction? And they said, well, we went to our electrical companies, and they told us to go away. They had no power in Japan. So each one of these countries has its own laws, and Americans like to think we can kind of, coerce people to do whatever. And many times they don't have the enacting laws here, even though it is a land of the rule of law. There are certain rules they don't want to be embedded into the law. So it's always interesting to try to fit it together. I think technically, the United States and Japan can do tremendous things together, culturally and legally, and then budget-wise. Just a simple, stupid thing of how governments budget. The United States government is not a reliable partner when it comes to budgeting for long-term programs, innovative programs. They certainly don't move fast, but they also don't move steadily and consistently over a long period of time. So the Japanese are loath to sign up for a multi-year program without some pretty strong reassurances that, we're going to do this together and we're going to march along and we're both going to get something out of it. And of course, in the United States, Congress rightfully says, well, that's our job. We're the ones that make the budget. Why are you, the executive branch, telling the Japanese you're going to do anything that involves money you have to get from us? So, and on the Japanese side, it's quite different. So it is very interesting work, and that's why folks like me can make a living in working the seams between these and trying to figure out how to make nice and do nice things together.
Well, the one thing that you've done that most Americans don't do, you've learned the language, you've lived in the culture, and you have an understanding of the differences, which, a lot of times on the U.S. side, I've, in my experience, well-intentioned people generally, but completely clueless in dealing in a foreign culture, in a foreign language, because we've never taken the time to learn the languages or actually, learn the culture. We've expected them to adapt to us. Not, you got to be like us. And how
it is, it has been intellectually interesting. The language is astonishingly different and astonishingly hard. I've seen a lot of people studying languages. I've studied languages since I was 15, starting with Latin. And every now and then I see some genius who can sit down and they can recall all the Chinese characters, the kanji, or they can understand something said very well, or they can speak very well. And usually those kind of go in a continuum. If you get Spanish, it's pretty easy to pronounce it. It's pretty easy to kind of remember. Everybody's got a bête noire of something or another. Mine was always, as a window, masculine or feminine when I took Portuguese. Like, okay, whatever, or neutral, or one of the other 5 genders in Latin. That's kind of a pain. In Japan, that's sort of Japanese, that doesn't exist. The language was created. This is a fascinating place. When I came here, I made every possible mistake in trying to work into the culture and be understood without stepping on toes. So some of that is just simply longevity. I do occasionally give presentations to traveling MBA groups, international MBA groups, about the business culture of doing business in Japan. And it's usually a filler. I'm the B squad, B or C squad for some college professor, which is fine with me. But often after my presentation, someone comes up and says, I wish at the beginning of our 2-week program here that you had spoken to us and told us what is going to happen. What is going to happen inside that company has nothing to do with the organization chart. You're going to be shown a Western style organization chart, but Japanese organizations don't work that way. They work on personal relationships that are much stronger, much more influential than the org chart by itself. And so, in understanding some of that, it has been interesting, and hopefully, I've contributed a bit. I've been on some government boards here on this utilization of space. I was the first foreigner on the Tokyo Judo
excuse me,
board. I still am. Myself and a lovely young German woman who could rip your arms off in a heartbeat. They stay on her good side, but it's a way to contribute back to a country which is very important to the United States and has been very good to me.
Well, so you and I are the same age, and so 1972, Nixon goes to China. And this big opening to China, which we now can look back and with some perspective, was a tad cynical, because the primary objective was to keep China from getting in bed with the Soviets and to have a counterbalance to the Soviets. And then in the next 50 years, over the course of that, the U.S. business world and our economy, a lot of it shifts into China in a way that, as you pointed out, makes us very dependent upon the Chinese. And so at the very time that we're becoming more dependent upon the Chinese, there's this political attitude that seems to cut across both parties that China's our enemy. And we keep saying it out loud. I'm not saying that China's not an adversary or that China has not done things that would be against U.S. interests. But when we keep talking openly about them as an enemy in light of this history, where does that leave us? What's that creating for us going forward?
It has created a very complex, to some level, fraught situation. I prefer to not speak of it as confrontation with China, more as a confrontation with the CCP. The Chinese Communist Party represents only a small portion of the people of China. And there is I think, a very cogent and correct argument that there is no such thing as China.
Mm-hmm.
That there never has been a thing such as China. It's always been a land, an area of people that in the past were composed of many of those ethnic minorities that I mentioned. And I have some slides on this if we have time or there's any interest to show what that means. Let me see if I can call one up quickly. Henry Kissinger's contribution, primary contribution to geostrategy, was the notion that the Soviet Union should never be, Soviet Union and China should never be closer together than they were to the United States. And it took a Nixon to actually take that step. So Taiwan was never tremendously important in the U.S. scheme of things, but it's not just Taiwan. At the time, there really wasn't any business there. There was business, but not of the strategic nature in which we find ourselves. But this goes back to Mackinder, who wrote of the Heartland geostrategic theory, that the real power in the world was whoever controlled this central landmass. If you look, it overlaps quite a bit with China today, this being China down in here. And Kissinger's revelation was that they could drive a wedge between the Soviet Union and China by recognizing China at the expense of the Kuomintang, the Taiwan Republic, the Republic of China in Taiwan. So that's what he was doing. So if we look at the Chinese, about 94% of them live right here. This is Hainan. Taiwan's out here. So the Uyghurs, the Tibetans, and all these other folks are out here, and it is very sparsely populated. And if you fly from, say, Shanghai out to Xi'an and actually see it from an airplane, it's stunning. As you fly along, you'll see village after village or city after city. 500,000 people here, 1 million people there, and then out here there's a whole lot of not much. Okay. And so the Han Chinese, the core of the Han Chinese is down here. But to understand the history of China and anything out here, you have to understand water in China, the rivers. So the Yangtze and the Yellow Rivers have ruled China for millennia. They control the lives of billions of people over their course. They rise out of their banks, they destroy everything, they don't come next year, everybody starves. The story of China is the story of hydraulic engineering, trying to figure out how to master these things, which leads to all sorts of cultural and historic adaptations in order to deal with that mass corvée labor, where you go into a town or a county, a village or whatever, and say, I need 5,000 men over here working on this dam now.
Yeah.
And everybody stops. So, and how people realize that sort of authoritarian central government is so important. And then you can see out here where those the 6% or whatever live. There's no water, essentially. A break on this. Do you want to go on with this?
Yeah, keep going. Yeah, that's fact. No, it's
I can go for a very
please.
long time.
Keep going.
All right, so back to it. So one of the fascinating projects in Japan is the Three Gorges Dam, which is closely associated with the current administration in the CCP, where they took the Yangtze River and they made this massive dam, the largest hydroelectric power project in the world, and there are 3 or 4 upstream from that are probably twice as much put together. But in the process, what happens is that a huge portion of China's GDP and population is downstream from this dam. If that dam ever goes, there are estimates that it'll kill millions outright and probably displace 100 million people.
Wow.
And I don't mean a little bit. I'm talking about downtown Wuhan being wiped out. Wuhan's the size of Chicago.
Now, let me ask. So the Three Gorges Dam, it's bigger than the dam at Itaipu down in Paraguay, and near the falls of Iguazu.
You're breaking up. I think in physical terms, it's the 3rd largest dam in the world.
Yeah, the one at the reason I asked is the one at Itaipu. I mean, it literally stretches like from horizon to horizon. It was the most incredible. And here's Paraguay, which is a nothing little country, but boy,
Okay, for me, you're breaking up, but you're recording, so that's okay. So this reservoir slack area is 880 kilometers long, and the project here. So the Three Gorges is not physically wide. It's actually in it's actually in a very narrow passage, which is a tremendous engineering feat to get it done. But it's an interesting, perhaps strategic weak point that the Chinese have.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at China broken up, you have these semi-arid areas. This is where the Uyghurs live, north of the Xinjiang, the desert, Tibet, the high plateau. Here's the Han being the primary ethnic core of China today, and then the other groupings. But you see these mountains that obstruct north-south trade, rivers, mountains. It's really hard. You got to truck over this. It's a very, very tough terrain, and that's where those rivers lie.
Mm-hmm.
So China runs this way, not this way. China runs this way. And actually, the coastal shipping is very, very intense off China. But what is China? That it was actually always some shifting group of minorities here, minorities there, different fighting factions. So this is 1929. This setup in the area that we now call China, including this Manchurian Soviet bloc here. It's interesting. And this modern map talking about 1921, they actually call this the Kingdom of Taiwan. It was never. It was a Japanese colony, but I suspect they did that to placate critics from China. So as the power center on the heartland, The Silk Road Economic Belt, the Belt and Road Initiative, is to build cross-continental trade lines through here where they didn't have to go around. But when they would send shipping instead of overland, send shipping, they would build what's called a string of pearls. The pearls being a priceless, a precious object in Chinese and Oriental philosophy. A string of pearls being a string of important commercial ports that would help them bring trade to Europe. So the original heartland thesis is over here as to how Mackinder saw it, that that heartland, industrial heartland power will build rails. And in fact, the U.S. investment in the early days of the Soviet Union essentially built all of their railroads and industrial capacity. So they had what in military terms you call interior lines of communication,
Right.
Very difficult to interdict, under their control. And that then this industrialized heartland would actually control the rimlands being the lands on the rim, on the periphery of the ocean and beyond. And what's interesting to me is the Chinese, despite having no port closer than about 1,500 miles from the Arctic, have actually kind of bought and bullied their way into the Arctic Council. They're looking very closely at what happens, as everyone else is, what happens when you can bypass the Suez Canal and go directly across the northern route to the European markets, when you don't have to worry about the Houthis hijacking ships.
Yeah.
Anti-ship drones at your ship. It's actually shorter and easier if there's no ice. And so there is an upside to global warming if it occurs. It ain't happening yet.
Of course, I would note that, like in Panama, the Chinese have been very active, and that most people don't understand that the Panama Canal runs north-south. It doesn't run east-west. Right. And at the north end of it, there's not one port. They've got actual several ports. And as last I checked, I think the Chinese own like 4 of the 5. I think.
So our mutual acquaintance, Michael Yon, looks into that quite a bit. He has some interesting presentations on the issues. So if you look at the Pacific, so you ask, is America losing the Pacific? Well, I would contend that never really had it. That the history of Western interaction with China was, Western interaction with China was along the coast here. It was primarily the English, followed by other folks, bringing in trade of various sorts, including the opium trade, which made the English quite a bit of money. Jardine Matheson, and then their American counterparts was Russell and Company out of the East Coast. So they're trading opium for Chinese silver, strip mining China for the silver, taking it and doing a triangular trade with Indian fabrics, picking up cotton in Egypt and feeding the mills to clothe Indians, and the Indians would grow the opium and then trade it to the Chinese for the silver. But this is modern AIS, Automated Independent System. It's essentially a IFF for ships.
Okay.
So this is by common agreement. It's any ship 300 tons or more is supposed to have this thing going. So you can see the density. So they come to the Taiwan Straits along the coast, and bear in mind a lot of this is intercoastal shipping for the Chinese, and then cross to there. I put the flash in the wrong place, but you can see going further up into Russia, this is Vladivostok, and then into the Chinese ports. So this is the world's largest ports in China. 80% of the world's global shipbuilding capacity. These are not sexy ships. These are very low margin ships. but they have something like 300% of the capacity of the United States right now.
Mm-hmm.
The United States abandoned shipbuilding for a variety of reasons. Once again, it's a tough business to do. The EPAs own you all the time about the materials. It's low margin, so they find it better to kind of abandon that market to South Korea, Japan, and more recently to China. But here you can see this is a heat map for intercoastal shipping, and you see what's going on between Shenzhen, Hong Kong, and up to Shanghai, Ningbo. The mass of shipping. Bear in mind this kind of blank spot here. I'll show you why. And then this trade with Taiwan to its major ports that are here, and up in Taipei, Keelung, and almost nothing on the eastern shore of Taiwan. Okay. So you can see the routes of going to Japan and South Korea. And here's some air traffic. This is just a snapshot of some air traffic that I took. Lots of airplanes making their way around. Lots of customers for Boeing, for Airbus, and for all of the Chinese manufacturers who are trying to get into that business. Regional jets, that's what everybody wants to sell in China.
Yeah, there's been sort of a symbiotic relationship between China and Boeing, that the Chinese don't really produce their own aircraft. They are dependent on Boeing, unlike the Russians have actually produced a homegrown airplane, a commercial jetliner.
Well, they're regional. They did some assembly. It started with McDonnell Douglas. I mean, but these actually go back to some extent. They go back pre-World War II, where there are cooperation in aviation products between the United States, China, and Japan, and particularly with Japan. They have produced regional jets on the global stage. They're not necessarily competitive because of weight, fuel usage of the engines and things like that. But when they use Western engines, they recover most of that pretty quickly. But in the past, I believe it started with McDonnell Douglas and went on to Boeing, where they were assembling 717s, which was a McDonnell Douglas MD-90 or whatever it was before they changed the designation. And those are carefully watched as to how the technology is taken, how it's managed, and they try to keep it in-house. Certainly it's difficult, and there's a lot of know-how that has slipped out over the years. But it is a huge market in a global market where both Boeing and Airbus typically sell at parity for large aircraft. But when you've got government like the CCP, they can turn on and off. They can turn on any airline to say, buy all Airbus today. No, stop that. Buy Boeing tomorrow. They get the attention of these large companies. I mean, you just have to.
So we're coming up on an hour here. We see, I told you it happens. We start talking and it goes fast. The critical question, I think, is: are we headed towards a war with China, or do you think, or do we have a path that's going to keep us from committing suicide?
Well, let's look at what a war means. Okay, so let me start again. So here's Taiwan. If you look at the Taiwanese, they live where those ports are. Mm-hmm. The available ports are where the Chinese population. This is some of the most mountainous terrain in Asia, and there's almost no population on the east coast of Taiwan. And where's the technology? The technology that the United States is concerned about, interested in, is started in Hsinchu Science Park. When I first went, there were like 2 buildings in the entire thing. Now it's shoulder to shoulder, the most dense population of advanced semiconductor manufacturing on the planet in history. Mm-hmm. It's all right there. So are we going to fight over Taiwan? Well, first off, it's really hard to get to Taiwan. All right, the Normandy invasions, the D-Day invasions of the Pas-de-Calais and the English Channel is pretty short ride. People swim it, right? And people don't swim the Taiwan Straits. This is 150 miles, 100 to 150 miles, and there are only about 3 or 4 beaches, and they're near the ports that could be accessed. If it was difficult before, and it was difficult before, it's going to be impossible shortly. Why? Drones, air. Drones that fly through the air, drones that fly through the water, drones that are launched off ships, drones that are launched off beaches, drones that are operated by 300-pound mama's boys in their basements.
Right.
The ability of countries to field militarily effective drones now is escalating to the extent that people can't really realize. There are only so many ways to stop them. You can wipe out all the electronics using directed energy weapons. Well, the problem is it tends to wipe out your electronics too. You can use lasers, directed energy lasers, but they are problematic at range and in weather. You can try to shoot them down, but as the Israelis are figuring out that $100,000 Iron Dome interceptor missile going after a $10,000 drone, that gets expensive real fast.
Yeah.
And typically the countermeasure is a much larger to move around. And once you expend them, then reloading is a pain. That ship may have sailed. If you can imagine, also here, it's not like they don't know where the Chinese are going to come. There's this very interesting feature under the ocean here called the Taiwan banks. The Taiwan banks are simply huge, and they're very shallow. It's less than 10 meters deep in spots. So it's very easy to mine, very easy to interdict, and people avoid it most of the time in peacetime anyhow. So any invasion fleet is already restricted to where it can come. It's going to be highly channelized, which means it can be highly mined and highly bombed and highly interdicted at range. And the Chinese don't necessarily have a tremendous number of military assault ships. They do have a very large number of commercial ferries, some of which have been built up to carry military equipment and have special I forgot the English, duplicative, diverse control system. They have dual control systems, so if one gets shot out, they can continue to operate the ship. Interestingly, this is a Japanese map of the interior of Taiwan. So this is the size of Connecticut, and this is 1.5 times the size of Maryland. If you think of Taiwan in that fashion, these are the Taiwan banks that kind of block that part of it. So the major Chinese fleets are up in here, and then they're further south. And now bringing them together once again in time of war, you're going within range of some, not very long range anti-ship missiles that are available to the Taiwanese and a lot of their friends. So the way the Chinese see this is they're trying to get control of the first island chain. The first island chain, as you look from China, it is the first island chain, the first row of obstacles to their access to the Pacific Ocean. That's what they call the first island chain. Japan forms a part of it. This is Kyushu. And so this is Okinawa, Miyako-jima, Luzon in the Philippines. So there are only 4 militarily useful passages. One is the Bashi Strait here, and these things were dangerous in World War II when U.S. submarines would try to come through here to get into the South China Sea to sink Japanese shipping. They would get caught here in the shallow waters because most of the times the submarines have to surface to get through. And also, they're very much in range of anti-ship missiles from the Okinawa Islands, the Taiwanese, the Philippines, everything else. There's now a Marine unit up here with anti-ship missiles, U.S. Marine unit. So this is the view from China, which means there's a first chain they have to either secure or transit, or a second chain. So I don't think the Chinese want to fight anybody. Certainly not anybody that can fight back. That's just not in the nature of their military strategy. What they will do is declare sort of a total war, which they have. But that is a full spectrum warfare where they're for example, and it's justified in their minds by that former opium trade where the British were bringing opium into the Chinese seaboard and selling brought up the rivers into other places in China. That was a humiliation that the Chinese mention all the time. They have the history of a horrible plague of opium use in China. But do they want to fight us? I don't think so. It's just a very tough place to be, but they're getting ready for it. Here's part of their military response. They've fortified Hainan, built up detection systems, deployed cruise missiles and anti-ship cruise missiles all along here, and they all start to overlap because these are fairly tight waters. Like I say, 100 nautical miles between Taiwan and the mainland through the Taiwan Strait. Let's see. So what is the U.S.? For example, the U.S. response to the impact areas? I'm sorry, should be 2022. They fired over Taiwan, over Taipei, but they're in outer space when the ballistic missiles flew. So they weren't actually in Taiwanese airspace. Some would say they were. What was the U.S. response? It deployed the Ronald Reagan, a modern aircraft carrier, and a couple of not escort carriers, but the marine landing ship amphibious with the flight decks behind the first island chain. See where they are. Okay, so they're here using the first island chain, knowing that if someone comes into them, they've got to take the Bashi Channel, which is right about here. They can't just steam through any of these poor areas. Excuse me. There are underwater features that probably have not been completely mapped by the Chinese. It's very dangerous to just storm through here. And also, they're so close to these small islands that they could be interdicted by much smaller anti-ship missile. Just the other day, a Chinese ship transited right up here in a Tokara Strait, which is just south of this the third largest Japanese island of Kyushu, just off here. Okay. So I don't think they want to actually go to war, but if we take a look at it, and let's talk about what they're doing. So in preparation for being on the other side of that, they're spending a lot of time, they're spending a lot of time in South Pacific. And this is a massive area. If you look, this is the continental United States. Mm-hmm. They're approaching every one of these small island nations and dealing with them, bringing them money, bringing them business in the form of tourists, fish canneries, you name it. And the United States once had a special relationship with most of these places and managed to screw it up because Washington can't get its act together. But this is still from here, Nomoi, right up in here at this tip of the United States is still another 2,500 miles to Hawaii, if you can imagine how big this is.
Yeah, that's huge.
But in terms of what it means for China, I go back to this, which I skipped. in Sun Tzu, Sun Tzu is often misunderstood, but he did say some things that were very interesting. And I like this first one is very important. So it is doctrine for them to be prepared, and until recent years, they were never prepared to the point that they could even dream of taking on the United States or any of its allies, working with the United States.
Well, that last bullet point.
I'm sorry?
I see that last bullet point. There is no instance of a country having benefited from prolonged warfare.
Right.
Boy, here's the United States. Seems that's been our policy for the last 70 years.
It's insanity.
Yeah.
It's never come home to America. It is a sort of advanced delusion because it happens to someone someplace else.
Yes. Yeah.
The tens of billions of dollars, the trillions of dollars we've spent on the wars since I was still in the military is just stunning. And at the end of the day, show me an example of successful nation building against the culture, the local culture, against the reality of people on the ground. I had classmates, West Point classmates of mine, who were in the room when the decisions were made to change from counterinsurgency and anti-terrorist operations in Afghanistan to nation building. And one of them told me, he said he was just stunned. His jaw hit the floor. What is the U.S. Army doing in that business?
Yeah.
Well, we got a lot of people killed, and a lot of money for certain defense contractors and construction companies and everything else. But what did we accomplish? I'm hard pressed to come up with anything positive.
Yeah. Well, on that downer note, we'll end. It is.
Sorry?
I said on that downer note, we will end.
Yeah. Well, no, let's end it on an upper note. Let me speak to that.
Okay.
So I'm quite optimistic that there will be no open conflicts with the Chinese. They have too much to lose. Go back and recall that single dam that has the livelihood of almost all of China. Something insane like half of the GDP is downstream from a single dam. Now, broaching that dam, destroying that dam to flood all of that would be the most criminal act in the history of warfare, probably.
Yeah.
You'd put 400 million people as refugees. You would kill any number outright, and then the starvation that would follow. China can barely feed itself. It's been stockpiling food now for the last 6 to 8 months, building up supplies because they don't have enough food. They don't have enough energy. They don't have enough raw materials. They don't have enough coal. They don't have enough of much of anything other than people. And the cohort of people that can actually enter the military is shrinking. They're on a tight time schedule if they're going to pull off something like an invasion of Taiwan. I don't think they have to invade Taiwan. I think that if they play their cards right, that eventually Taiwan will just become part of China. They'll work something out. Given the poor example of how they've treated Hong Kong, I suspect it would be something different in Hong Kong. Also, they are an island, so they can enforce it a little bit better, perhaps. But I don't think they're going to war at all. We're almost at war with ourselves. They're just going to let us each other off, spin ourselves into oblivion. Somebody in China is buying a lot of gold right now. That's an interesting fact in itself. So in terms of open shooting war, I don't think it's going to happen. I think that they push so hard, they now realize that they have the Japanese and the Koreans and the Filipinos and the Vietnamese all talking, cooperating. The Singaporeans are hosting a major U.S. presence there. I think that day came and went before we actually realized it, and also that's before the technology to put a drone on every one of those commercial roll-on, roll-off ferry ships,
Right,
and drone them into oblivion. That's before you get those drones built. And I think some smart people in Taiwan are figuring that out right now, and how they can build them, because the technology for them for the actual devices themselves is not that difficult, and you can mass produce it. You can keep them in indefinite storage. We're going to learn a lot of lessons from the Ukrainian-Russian war. But one of them that the Chinese certainly did not have, it set them back. They have taken notice that the drones are ruling the battlefield, and it makes a big difference in the South China Sea. Now they have put a physical presence in a lot of places in the South China Sea, and that still has to play out. One of their facilities is bigger than Pearl Harbor, which is pretty astonishing, given that it was a semi-submerged sandbar before they filled it in and built it up. But overall, I'm optimistic that we're not going to war over all of this. They're too smart. They're going to let us be stupid and kill ourselves off first.
Well, yeah, that's what.
Is that a happier note?
Yeah, it is. Well, I recognize that in this, the United States has its fate in its hand. That we're and we seem to be on a path of self-destruction. But you know what? That I had not seen that one bullet point from Sun Tzu, that there is no instance of a country having benefited from prolonged warfare. But that's going to become my motto. I think it's tremendously wise. Hey, my friend, it is. We're going to do this again, because we haven't even begun to broach a lot of subjects. But thank you for proving that I was right at the beginning when I said you're one of the smartest guys I know.
Well, I think you need to widen your circle of acquaintances if that's the case. But thank you for the kind words. I hope it's of some utility and interest to your folks and subscribers.
And didn't mean to keep you up so late, but thanks for staying up and doing this.
What I spend most of my time on these days is my history project, which helps set the background for all of this, how Japan and China and the United States have interacted since the mid 1800s. And a lot of things that people have forgotten about, but still have an impact on the history today. So
yeah,
thanks.
And we've talked about this before. I mean, it's really impressive what you've done with this, and I will encourage people to certainly take a look and to follow it. But all right, my friend Lance, thanks for doing this.
All right, you're welcome.
All right, this concludes today's episode of Countercurrents, this week's episode. And encourage everybody that watched and enjoyed this, like, subscribe, and please follow Lance at the Kano Chronicles. And you can see the link there. All right, my friend, thanks.